The palace halls were silent as Leora walked toward the royal chamber. Her heart pounded, but her steps were steady. She had spent her entire life obeying, never questioning the rules. But now, after seeing her people with her own eyes, after speaking to them, not as a princess, but as one of them, she could no longer pretend that everything was fine. She entered the chamber, where the ruling council and the elders sat in a half-circle. Elder Vire stood at the center, his sharp gaze fixed on her. "You have been seen walking freely among the commoners," he said, his voice filled with quiet disapproval. "This is not the behavior of a princess." Leora met his gaze. "And why not?" she asked. Murmurs filled the room. No one had ever questioned the elders before. Vire frowned. "Because tradition has kept our people safe for generations. We do not mix with outsiders. We do not change what has worked." Leora took a deep breath. "But has it really worked? Our people do not grow. They follow the same routines every day, never daring to dream of more. I have seen them, Elder. They have strength, creativity, and wisdom, yet we do not listen to them. We only control them." More whispers filled the room. The other elders shifted uncomfortably. They had never heard a princess speak this way. Vire's expression darkened. "You are young, princess. You do not understand the dangers of change. Our ways have survived for a reason. To embrace new ideas is to invite chaos." Leora shook her head. "No, to refuse change is to let our world grow weak." The room fell into silence. Then a voice spoke from behind. "I agree." Everyone turned. James stepped forward from the entrance. Though he had been invited to observe, he had remained quiet. Until now. He looked at the elders, his expression calm yet firm. "I come from a world that changed many times," he said. "Some changes were difficult. Some were painful. But every great civilization that survived did so by adapting. You fear chaos, but stagnation is far more dangerous." Leora turned to the elders, her voice strong. "We do not have to abandon our ways, but we must grow. We must listen to our people. If we do not, we will not survive." Silence filled the chamber. The elders looked at one another, uncertainty in their eyes. For the first time in history, someone had challenged the traditions of Iridia. And for the first time, the elders had no immediate answer. Lyra knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would not be easy. But she had made her choice. She was ready to fight for a future that belonged not just to the rulers, but to the people. "You said, in a faraway galaxy there was a small planet called Iridia. On this planet lived many kind and gentle people, and among them was a young princess named Leora. She was known for her bright eyes, graceful manner, and soft voice. Leora grew up in a grand palace, filled with beautiful gardens and ancient stone halls. Yet even with all the beauty around her, she often felt a deep longing for something more. A chance to see the world beyond old customs and strict traditions. One clear morning, as the golden light of dawn spread over the palace gardens, Leora wandered slowly among the blooming flowers. Her mind was filled with quiet dreams about a different life, one where change was not something to be feared. While she admired the delicate petals and listened to the soft songs of the morning birds, a strange sound reached her ears, a low, steady rumble that did not belong to the peaceful music of nature. At the edge of the garden, near a high stone wall, a small spacecraft had landed. The craft's door opened, and a human soldier named Lieutenant James stepped out. He wore a simple uniform with a few badges that told of his hard work and dedication. James had been sent from Earth on a peaceful mission to learn about new cultures and to help if needed. His eyes were kind and full of determination, and his calm smile spoke of quiet strength. When Leora saw James, her heart skipped a beat. She had never seen a human before, and his presence filled her with both wonder and caution. James noticed the princess immediately. With respectful politeness, he bowed his head slightly and spoke in clear, gentle words. "I come in peace," he said. "My name is James, and I am here to learn about your world." His voice was simple and honest. The palace guards and his small team stood at a distance, watching the unusual meeting with quiet curiosity. But for Lyora and James, time seemed to slow down. Lyora's eyes widened as she took in every detail, the soft cadence of his speech, the steady look of kindness in his eyes, and the genuine respect in his posture. In that moment, both felt that fate had brought them together for a reason. They walked together to a quiet corner of the garden, where the gentle breeze played among the leaves. There, James told Lyora about Earth, a distant land of many struggles, hopes, and dreams. He spoke simply about his family, his country, and the ideas of change and growth that had helped his people overcome great challenges. Lyora listened closely, feeling a spark of hope light up inside her. Perhaps, she thought, there was a way for her own people to grow and heal by embracing new ideas. This unexpected meeting marked the beginning of a new journey. Lyora felt a shift in her heart, and Lieutenant James felt honored by the chance to meet such a noble soul. Though their worlds were different, their encounter opened a door to a future where kindness, respect, and the courage to change could build bridges between distant stars. Lyora sat in the palace infirmary, watching as the royal healer wrapped a bandage around James's wounded arm. The room was quiet except for the soft crackling of a burning incense stick nearby. James, despite his injury, sat relaxed, his eyes scanning the elegant walls and the golden glow of Iridian lanterns. "You didn't have to fight for me," Lyora said after a moment. Her voice was softer than usual. James gave her a small smile. "Of course I did. You were in danger." Lyora frowned, folding her hands in her lap. "But you are not my guard. You owe me nothing." James shook his head. "It's not about owing. It's about doing what's right." His words made her chest tighten. All her life, she had been taught that everything had a price. Loyalty, duty, even kindness. People served her because of her title, not because they cared. But James had no reason to help her, yet he did without hesitation. The healer finished and gave a respectful bow before leaving the room, leaving them alone. Lyora hesitated before reaching for a clean cloth and dipping it in warm water. Slowly, she handed it to James. "Let me help," she said. James raised an eyebrow, but accepted the cloth. He wiped the sweat and dust from his face, sighing as the cool water soothed his skin. "Thanks," he said simply. Lyora watched him closely. "Humans, you live so differently from us." James chuckled. "That's an understatement." She tilted her head. "You speak of honor, but not the way we do. To us, honor is about purity, about following traditions without question. But you—" She hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Your honor seems to come from something deeper." James leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "Honor isn't about doing what you're told. It's about doing what's right, even when no one is watching. Even when it's hard." Lyora's breath caught. Doing what's right, even when no one is watching. Those words felt like a whisper to her soul. She thought about the endless rituals she followed, the rules that bound her. She had spent her whole life doing what was expected, never questioning if it was right or wrong. She looked at James again, seeing him in a new light. Humans were not perfect, but they were not as reckless as she had been told. They were courageous, adaptable, free. A sudden thought filled her mind, something bold and dangerous. What if she could be free too? But freedom required courage. Was she brave enough? James saw the conflict in her eyes but said nothing. He simply smiled and leaned back. "You don't have to decide anything now. Change doesn't happen all at once." Lyora nodded, gripping the cloth tightly. Change. She had feared it for so long. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go of that fear. Lyora walked through the grand hall of the palace, her mind restless. The conversation with Lieutenant James had left a mark on her heart. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight she could not ignore. What if change was not something to fear, but something to embrace? But Elder Vyer's warning echoed in her mind. Humans were not to be trusted. They were outsiders, and their ways could disrupt the balance of their world. Yet, when she looked into James's eyes, she saw no deception, only sincerity. That evening, as the twin moons of Iridia rose high in the sky, Leora stood on her balcony, staring at the stars. A soft breeze carried the distant sounds of the palace below. Somewhere out there, James was still in the gardens, waiting for answers she was not yet ready to give. Then the silence was broken by an alarming sound, a sudden explosion from the outer courtyard. Leora gasped as the ground beneath her trembled. Shouts filled the air, and the palace guards rushed toward the disturbance. She ran through the halls, her heart pounding. When she reached the courtyard, she saw chaos, smoke rising from a broken wall, palace guards fighting off a group of masked intruders. A cold chill ran down her spine. An assassination attempt. Before she could react, she felt a sharp pull at her arm. A masked figure had grabbed her, dragging her away from the palace. She struggled, but the attacker was strong. Panic rose in her chest as she realized no one had noticed her being taken. Then, a flash of movement, a streak of silver and blue. James. He moved like lightning, his combat training kicking in as he tackled the attacker to the ground. The masked figure tried to fight back, but James was faster, more precise. A well-aimed punch sent the attacker sprawling, and before he could recover, James grabbed Leora's hand and pulled her behind him. "Stay behind me," he ordered, scanning the area for more threats. Leora had no time to argue. More attackers rushed toward them, their weapons drawn. But James did not hesitate. He fought with a mix of skill and strategy, using every movement to his advantage. Leora had seen her guards train before, but she had never seen anyone move like him. He was not just fighting, he was protecting. Soon, the palace guards joined in, overpowering the remaining intruders. As the dust settled, James turned to Leora, his expression serious. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, still breathless from the ordeal. "No, but you?" She stopped when she saw a cut on his arm. James glanced at the wound, then shrugged. "It's nothing, as long as you're safe." Leora stared at him, something shifting inside her. He had no reason to risk his life for her, yet he did, without hesitation. At that moment, she understood. James was not like the stories she had been told about humans. He was different. And maybe, just maybe, change was not something to fear after all. The next morning, Leora stepped out of the palace dressed in a simple white robe, different from the heavy, jewel-adorned garments she was expected to wear. The palace servants whispered among themselves, confused by her unusual choice, but Leora ignored them. Today, she would walk as herself, not as the princess trapped by tradition. James stood near the gardens, speaking with a few palace guards. He turned when he saw her, his eyes scanning her new appearance with quiet curiosity. "You look different," he said. Leora nodded. "I feel different." She stepped closer, standing beside him as they looked out toward the city beyond the palace walls. The people of Iridia went about their daily routines, following the same patterns they had for centuries. But for the first time, Leora wondered, what if they wanted something more? She turned to James. "You once told me that change doesn't happen all at once." He nodded. "It starts with a choice." Leora took a deep breath. "I want to see more. To learn more. Not just from books or advisors, but from real people." James smiled. "That sounds like a good place to start." The two of them left the palace gates and walked through the bustling city streets. Leora had rarely been among her people without guards and royal ceremonies. Now she saw them as they truly were. Children playing in the dusty roads, merchants calling out their prices, workers wiping sweat from their brows after long hours of labor. She stopped by an elderly woman selling woven fabrics. The woman bowed deeply when she recognized Leora, but Leora quickly reached out, stopping her. "There's no need for that," she said gently. The woman hesitated, then straightened, looking surprised. Leora ran her fingers over the fabric, feeling the rough yet sturdy texture. "This is beautiful," she said. "Did you make this yourself?" The woman nodded proudly. "With my own hands, princess." Leora smiled, realizing something important. These people were more than just subjects. They were creators, workers, thinkers. They had dreams, just like she did. James watched her closely, sensing the shift happening inside her. Later, as the sun began to set, they returned to the palace. Elder Vire was waiting at the entrance, his face filled with disapproval. "You have been walking among commoners?" he asked, his voice sharp. Leora met his gaze, standing tall. "Yes." Vire narrowed his eyes. "That is not the way of our people." Leora lifted her chin. "Perhaps it should be." The elder stiffened at her words, but for the first time in her life, Leora did not feel afraid. She had taken the first step towards something new, and she was not going to turn back. The morning sun rose over the palace, its golden light spilling into the grand hall where Leora stood. She looked out at the crowd gathered before her, elders, citizens, and even a few alien dignitaries who had arrived to witness this historic day. For the first time in Iridia's long history, the ancient laws were being revised, and the people were ready to embrace a new way forward. James stood quietly near the back of the hall, his arms crossed, a small proud smile on his face. He had become a trusted friend and an advisor, someone who had offered Leora the courage to question tradition and discover her own strength. Leora stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "Today, we do not abandon who we are. We honor our past, but we no longer fear the future. We open our hearts to growth, to learning, and to cooperation, not just among ourselves, but with those who come from beyond our skies." A soft murmur ran through the crowd. Some still held doubts, but the majority looked on with hope. They saw a leader who had not only faced resistance, but had risen above it. A leader who had chosen compassion over fear, action over hesitation. Elder Vire, once her fiercest opponent, now stood beside her. He nodded in approval, his expression one of quiet respect. "You've proven that change can be guided with wisdom and grace," he said. "I was wrong to resist." Leora smiled gently. "We were all afraid, but fear is not what defines us. It's how we move forward despite it." The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of the first People's Forum, a new space within the palace where any citizen could voice their concerns and ideas. It was a small step, but it symbolized a shift in the very foundation of Iridian society. The strict divisions between ruler and citizen, tradition and progress, were beginning to blur, replaced by a shared vision of a stronger, more unified future. Later that evening, as the sky darkened and stars began to twinkle, Leora found James in the garden where they had first spoken. She approached him quietly, her white robe catching the starlight. "Thank you," she said. James turned, raising an eyebrow. "For what?" "For showing me that honor is more than tradition, that courage is more than strength, and that change is not the enemy." He smiled. "You had that in you all along. I just helped you see it." Leora gazed up at the stars, her heart lighter than it had ever been. She had faced her fears, challenged the past, and found a way to lead with both wisdom and compassion. And though the road ahead would be long and full of challenges, she no longer walked it alone. She had her people, her hope, and the lessons she had learned. For the first time, the future felt bright. For the first time, it felt truly her own. The council chamber remained silent. The elders exchanged glances, some with uncertainty, others with quiet resistance. Leora stood tall, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. She had spoken the truth. Change was coming, whether they accepted it or not. Elder Vire finally spoke. "And what do you suggest, Princess? That we throw away the wisdom of our ancestors? That we let outsiders influence our ways?" Leora took a deep breath. "No, I suggest we learn. We do not need to erase our past, but we must open our minds to the future." She glanced at James. "Humans are different from us, but they have survived through change, through struggle. Their ways may not be ours, but there is wisdom in understanding them. James stepped forward, his voice steady. I am not here to force your people to change. That is for you to decide. But I have seen great civilizations fall, not because they were weak, but because they refused to grow. The murmurs among the council grew louder. Some elders nodded thoughtfully, while others looked uneasy. Elder Vire narrowed his eyes. And what would this growth look like, Princess? Leora hesitated only for a moment before answering. It starts with small steps. Let the people be heard. Let them speak of their needs, their dreams. Allow them to explore new ideas while still respecting our traditions. Let them choose their own path. A younger elder, one who had remained silent until now, spoke up. And what of the outsiders? He looked at James. Do we allow them to walk freely among us? Leora met his gaze. If they come with respect and open hearts, why should we fear them? James remained quiet, letting Leora take the lead. This was her world, her people. He was just here to support the idea that progress was not a threat. It was a gift. Elder Vire studied Leora for a long time. Then, with a sigh, he stepped back. The council will discuss this matter further, he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. But know this, Princess. Once change begins, there is no turning back. Leora smiled, a newfound fire in her eyes. That is the point, Elder. As she and James left the chamber, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She knew there would be resistance, that the fight was far from over. But today, she had taken the first step towards something greater, a future where tradition and progress could exist together. She turned to James. Thank you. James gave her a small grin. For what? For showing me a different way, she said. For helping me find the courage to question, to choose. James chuckled. You had that courage all along, Princess. Leora looked up at the sky, feeling the cool evening air against her skin. For the first time, she wasn't just following a path. She was creating one. Leora sat on a smooth stone bench in the garden, her eyes fixed on Lieutenant James. The human soldier was unlike anyone she had ever met. He spoke simply, yet his words carried great meaning. She had always been told that humans were unpredictable, too bold, and reckless. But James did not seem dangerous. Instead, he seemed calm, steady, and respectful. You are different from what I expected, Leora said softly, watching him with curiosity. James gave a small smile. And what did you expect? She hesitated before answering, carefully choosing her words. I was told that humans only care about power and war, that they take what they want without thinking of others. James let out a quiet chuckle. Not all humans are like that. Just as not all the Ridians are the same. He gestured toward the palace behind her. Your people live with tradition, don't they? Leora nodded. Yes. We have followed the same ways for thousands of years. Everything is decided by the elders. There are rules for how we eat, speak, and even how we bathe. We must remain pure, untouched by outside influence. James raised an eyebrow. That sounds strict. Leora sighed, looking down at her hands. It is, but it is the only way I know. James thought for a moment before he spoke again. On Earth, things change. We make mistakes, we learn, and we grow. Sometimes we fail, but that helps us move forward. If we stayed the same forever, we would never improve. Leora tilted her head, considering his words. But change is dangerous. What if it destroys our way of life? James met her gaze with steady eyes. What if it makes it better? The princess had no answer to that. For years, she had felt trapped by the weight of tradition, but she had never dared to question it. Now this human soldier, someone completely different from her world, was making her wonder if there was another path. Before she could speak again, a sharp voice interrupted them. Princess Leora. They both turned to see an elder advisor standing near the garden entrance. His face was tight with disapproval, his silver robes flowing in the wind. Behind him, a group of palace guards watched with wary eyes. Lyora stood quickly, smoothing her dress. "Elder Vyre," she greeted him with a respectful nod. The elder's gaze shifted to James. "You should not be speaking so freely with an outsider, Your Highness. It is improper." Lyora clenched her hands at her sides. "He has done nothing wrong. He saved me." Vyre's expression did not change. "That does not mean he belongs here." He turned to James with cold politeness. "You are a guest, Lieutenant, but do not forget, you are not one of us." James remained calm, but he could see the struggle in Lyora's eyes. She was caught between duty and curiosity, between her past and the possibility of something new. As the elder led her away, Lyora looked back at James one last time. He did not speak, but his steady gaze told her everything. Change is not always a bad thing. And for the first time in her life, Lyora wondered if she had the courage to embrace it. The days that followed were filled with tension. Some of the elders resisted Lyora's ideas, unwilling to let go of the strict traditions that had shaped their world. Others, however, saw the truth in her words. The palace became a place of quiet debate, whispers of change spreading through the halls like an unstoppable tide. But not everyone welcomed this new way of thinking. Late one evening, as Lyora walked through the palace gardens, she sensed something was wrong. The usual peace of the night was broken by the rustling of movement in the shadows. Before she could react, a group of masked figures emerged, their weapons drawn. A voice, cold and firm, spoke. "You have gone too far, Princess." Lyora's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "Who are you?" she demanded. One of the figures stepped closer. "We are the keepers of tradition. We will not let you destroy what has kept our people safe for centuries." Lyora swallowed hard. She had expected resistance, but she had not expected this. Just as the first attacker lunged, a blur of motion appeared from the side. James. He moved with precision, disarming the first attacker in an instant. The fight broke out quickly, and despite being outnumbered, James fought fiercely, his training and instincts guiding him. Lyora, remembering everything James had told her about survival, ducked low, using the moment of distraction to evade the enemy's grasp. Palace guards arrived soon after, drawn by the sounds of the battle. The masked figures, realizing they were losing, retreated into the darkness. James turned to Lyora. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, breathless but unharmed. "No, thanks to you." Elder Vyre arrived moments later, his expression dark. "What happened here?" Lyora stood tall. "There are those who fear change so much that they would rather fight than listen. They tried to stop me tonight, but they failed." The elder studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Then you must be doing something right." For the first time, Lyora saw something different in his eyes. Not resistance, but respect. The following day, the ruling council gathered once more. This time, Lyora spoke not as a princess bound by tradition, but as a leader who had earned her place. "We must not fear the future," she said. "We must build it." The council listened. The elders debated. And in the end, they agreed. Change was necessary. James stood by her side, a quiet smile on his face. "Looks like you won." Lyora exhaled, feeling the weight of victory. "No, we all did." The path ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time, Lyora knew her people were ready to walk it with her. "You said." The sun was setting over Iridia, painting the sky in shades of deep violet and warm gold. Lyora stood alone in the royal bath chamber, staring at her reflection in the large crystal mirror. The events of the past few days had left a mark on her, not just in her heart, but in her mind. James's words echoed inside her. "Honor isn't about doing what you're told. It's about doing what's right." For so long, she had believed that purity was about following traditions, never questioning, never changing. But James had shown her a different kind of strength, one that came not from blind obedience, but from choice. She looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of years of expectations pressing down on her. The rules of her people demanded that she follow a strict cleansing ritual every evening, a process meant to purify her body and mind. But tonight, she did not want to simply wash away the dirt. She wanted to wash away fear. With slow, deliberate movements, she stepped forward and reached for the ceremonial water. It shimmered with a soft blue glow, infused with the sacred minerals of her world. She let it run over her hands, her arms, her face. But this time, she did not follow the usual motions. Instead of repeating the whispered prayers she had been taught since childhood, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. What do I truly want? For the first time in her life, she did not think about duty or expectation. She thought about herself. The water felt cool against her skin, cleansing not just her body, but something deeper. She imagined washing away doubt, washing away hesitation. A quiet knock came at the door. "Princess." James's voice was careful, respectful. Lyora opened her eyes and turned. The door was slightly open, and through it, she saw James standing in the hallway. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, but there was a softness in his eyes. "You're different," he said finally. "Something has changed." Lyora let out a slow breath. I am finally beginning to understand." James nodded, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. Understanding is the first step. Lyora met his gaze, and for the first time, she felt lighter. Not because she had followed a ritual, but because she had chosen to cleanse herself in her own way. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. James smiled. "That's the best part. You get to decide." The words sent a thrill through her. She gets to decide. As the last rays of sunlight faded behind the horizon, Lyora felt something new awaken inside her, a quiet, determined strength. For the first time, she was not just a princess following orders. She was Lyora, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next.